Welcome, welcome, heroes of the Horde and adventurers of the Alliance. My name is Weirdo with a Y, and I'd like to tell you a story. Not my story, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, an introduction. Like many of you, I love Warcraft. I love its incredible worlds, really. I love its grand heroic characters. I love its convoluted plot lines. I love that it was more or less just a bunch of dudes D&D campaign that they got lucky enough to publish and turn into an unbreakable monolith that has defined the MMO genre and continues to do so even in its air quotes decline. But above all, I love it as a vehicle for stories. Stories of heroes who stand defiant against the forces of corruption. Stories of villains seeking power at all costs, even if that cost is their very soul. Stories of found families struggling to carve out a place in the world for themselves, and struggling against their own nature to make the world a better place. Stories of lovers torn apart in the face of duties bigger than themselves, yet who always manage to find their way back to one another. Stories of heroes so overwhelmed by the weight of their responsibilities, and so desperate not to fail the ones they rely on them, that they fall into the very darkness that they hoped to destroy. And yes, stories of big, chunky, grizzled warriors charging headfirst into battle against an army of monsters wearing huge armor with ridiculous shoulder pads, holding swords as large as minivans, and screaming about honor and victory. I love all of it. I love all of it, even despite its flaws. Hell, perhaps because of its flaws. But even with all this love, lately, WoW just hasn't felt the same. And I know I can't be the only one who's felt this way. And since I've just cracked my second beer, why don't we get into it? Now, I've been around for a long time, though perhaps not as long as some. I started playing WoW in late 2005. I was in middle school, and I found myself a home as a gnome warlock in a guild made up of my buddy's older family members. I was around to see Classic, though if I recall, I don't think I hit 60 before Burning Crusade launched. I remember guildies talking about Encourage and picturing the monstrous old god waiting in its depths as the stuff of nightmares. I also remember feeling like a little anime girl, wishing I could help my big Nisama. Say that right? Okay. When Naxxramas dropped. I remember all my guildies rushing through the dark portal, and I skipped homework so that I might be able to go and join them. I even RP walked through the dark portal when it was my turn, though I was a gnome, so my walk looked about as dignified as a corgi dog on a treadmill. They were truly wonderful times. However, despite my pedigree, a word I want you all to know that I was unable to say without rolling my eyes, it's not my intention to shake my stick at the youngins and declare Warcraft my personal lawn which all of you need to get off of. No, I'm fully aware that a medium must adapt and evolve to survive. Hell, not even to survive, to stay interesting. If I'd done nothing but fight Arthas for 20 years, my condolences to all the invincible farmers out there, I doubt I'd be as deeply in love with the story as I still am to this day. Because don't get me wrong, I've been along for the ride. In BC, I let myself be consumed by the old lore. I remember looking at the black and white sketches of the dragon aspects on WoWWiki and losing my shit when I found out we'd be fighting Malagos. Meeting Alexstrasza for the first time was a genuine highlight of my childhood, as strange as that may sound. Putting together red string pin boards about how Pandaria would be included, I was very wrong. I listened to theories about what the remaining vials from the Well of Eternity might be doing on YouTube, and so many other examples. But then, somewhat recently, things started to change. Not fall apart exactly, but the cracks were there from as early as Warlords of Draenor. If I could really put my finger on it, I would say it was probably about halfway through Battle for Azeroth. Things became different, wrong in so many ways. It started as a symptom of development. Deadlines, story pieces missing, corporate meddling, all guesswork on my part, and a bit of informed investigation. But soon enough, when all the pieces of the story were put together, they still didn't add up too much. As I mentioned, it wouldn't bother me if the story had simply shifted or the style had changed. This is a story that's been told for nearly 30 years, with dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of writers having had a hand in its shaping. Not to mention its millions of players who also helped shape the world. The game was always going to change. The world was always going to change. The story was always going to change. The issue was not that it changed, instead it was broken. Plot lines were set up and abandoned, characters were no longer acting like themselves, or with any consistency whatsoever. The voices of the Horde and the Alliance suddenly were reduced to caricatures of old friends, and then they were promptly changed again to the voices of total strangers. It's hardly a world-shaking, cataclysm-causing statement to say that BFA was kind of a mess. It's even less inspired to say that Shadowlands was a clown circus of train wrecks and the clowns were all on fire and the trains were full of manure. A lot of people say that Dragonflight was a step in the right direction, and from a gameplay perspective, I think that's probably true, but from a narrative perspective, nearly every single line of dialogue felt like a tiger palm to my face, running the gamut of childishly inept to heapfully disrespectful to a subject matter that I think we all hold pretty close to our hearts. War Within has been better, I admit, but it's still tinged with a wrongness that is difficult to explain. In the past, Every new announcement from the WoW team would excite me. I'd search everywhere for leaks and hints and interviews and pre-release beta tests, all of it. But for the last several years, I would actively dread release windows. And now, in the present, I hold my breath and I look askance, never sure what to expect. But that's not why I'm here. Well, it's not only why I'm here. And I guess that brings me to the point. Why am I here? Well, let me tell you, audience. And given how the algorithm works, I suppose by audience, I really mean, hi, Mom. Around the mid-Shadowland times, I had to cut way back on WoW, D&D, and gaming in general to focus on grad school work. During that time, me and some of my old WoW buddies got together and we started talking about the story. The disrespect to Sylvanas, the strange paralysis of Bane and Bolvar, the nipples of the jailer, all pretty standard stuff for the time, and then one of us, as a joke, said, "I don't even know how you would fix all of this shit." And boom, like that, the idea was born. We started throwing around ideas on how to make Shadowlands fun. And then we rolled it back to BFA, and then Legion. Some of us had pretty abysmal Order Hall stories. And then Warlords. It was a lot of great fun, but mostly drunken nonsense. Nevertheless, I was captivated. We kept talking about our ideas and what we might add or change over the next few weeks. And the weeks became months, and those months became a year. I got to the point where I was still wary of the announcements, but at the same time I was excited. Excited to see what curves they could throw us, so we could fix it. We even had our "this should be a podcast" moment, and we discussed how we might do that. That was 3 or 4 years ago now. It was a fun night. It was a fun running group chat, but what got me was how much the ideas felt right. How perfect they felt, and how much stronger the story became because of it. I've had to do other things, I've lost contact with some of the friends, but I kept the document, and I started to update it from time to time. I started to organize my thoughts, catalog them, I lay out the progression of events, and I became proud of what I'd put together. At a certain point, it stopped being about fixing WoW, and it became sort of a campaign in my mind. And how I would have told the story if I'd been at the helm, or how I might run the story of WoW as a D&D campaign for my friends. As time went by, the idea pushed me to start going back even further. Why did Garrosh have such a heel-face turn, seemingly out of nowhere, that overwrote his character development? Why did Neptulon suddenly vanish during Cataclysm, never to return? Why was Kael'thas a different character in WoW than he was in Warcraft 3? Why not fix, air quotes, all of it? Weirdo, you say. What about several paragraphs and minutes of my life ago where you claimed to love WoW, even despite its flaws? Well, yes, and I stand by that. The flaws of WoW have never made me love Warcraft less, but I can't deny that the story of WoW has often taken a backseat to the gameplay. Rightfully so, perhaps. WoW is a game, after all, and it must be fun. Games should be fun. Which is why I feel that if I'm to actually do this, and to work on this project, I must make some acknowledgements first. Acknowledgement number 1. This will never be my story. These characters will never be my characters, and this world will never be my world. And though I may change and alter things, the story can never truly be called mine. It will ultimately amount to writing AU fanfiction, and as someone who has, for the better part of my life, hated fanfiction, that is a tough pill to swallow. But I also think it's important to remember, for anyone who happens to be listening, and also for myself. So don't get cocky, me of the future, or I will come back swinging and knock you and your overstuffed ego off your pedestal. Acknowledgement number 2. What I'm proposing to do by fixing the story of WoW is demonstrably unfair. At least as far as the implication that the original team of writers did anything wrong. WoW's story has been, as I mentioned, shaped by numerous creative directors, the beyond numerous writers of novels, short stories, quests, and the innumerable contributions we as players have made along the way. To then say that, "I'ma do it better," after everyone has put in their hours, and to do it without the Thunderdome of release dates, creative friction, programming crunches, rabid unpleasable fan bases, and most notably the burden of past mistakes hanging over my head, is somewhat of a farce. I want to reshape the story, how I would tell it as a DM, with the story placed first above gameplay. However, it must be said that I'll have a much easier time trying to deliver something coherent than the team did over the years. In essence, I get to cheat, while the original story did not. Well, at least not until recently, but that's an issue for another time. Acknowledgement number 3. When the time comes for me to address the issues in the narrative, I have no intention of pointing fingers or naming specific names. Now, I should explain what I mean by that. I'm a massive Chris Metzen fanboy, and I can chalk a lot of that up to nostalgia, but over the years, we also got to know many of the other names and personalities behind the Warcraft narrative, aside from Metzen. Unignorable influences on the direction from the likes of Samwise Didier or Taron Gregory, the novelists Richard A. Knack and Christy Golden, both of whom brought very different but important facets of Azeroth to light with their works. Old hands like Chilton, Hazakastis, Kazek, even Brack. And then, of course, there are a few names who I consider to be problematic, such as Denuzer or Afraziabi, and frankly, the less said about them, the better. Now, of course, I have my theories about where things went wrong, who pushed things in the wrong direction, whose influence might have been better kept in check, but ultimately those are all just theories. I will never, ever know who made the choices that broke the Warcraft narrative. I'll never know if a choice was made at all. Perhaps it was the product of development. Perhaps it was two minds unable to agree in the writer's room, so a compromise was made. Perhaps it had nothing to do with the story and someone just phoned it in a day. Anything and everything is possible at any time, and I will never know the true answer. To that end, whenever I am laying out my grievances, I will not speculate as to why a given choice was made, only what I find wrong with it and how I might fix it. In some cases, I will attack the narrative viciously. In other cases, I will acknowledge the outside forces that we're allowed to know about. But at all times, I will refer to the work of a team. If I criticize anything, it will be the work, and never any members of Blizzard personally. And acknowledgement number cuatro. I have essentially no reason to do this, except that I want to. I am a huge dork, and I love to write stories. I like to play D&D with my friends, and I love Warcraft. These things are what are driving me to this, and because the more the story goes along, the more my rewrites felt like they just fit into things. I resolved that I would do this just around the time Dragonflight was announced. That was the time Blizzard was trying to push the end of Shadowlands as the end of the story of Warcraft 3. That point was a hilarious PR blunder on their part, but it made me think about the concept of endings. All stories need an ending, but it's likely that the story of Warcraft will only end when it becomes so bad that nobody wants to buy it. This is a game. It is a product made for consumption, and it comes with many of the same flaws that come from the shows that are written not for a narrative, but for serialization. At the time, I decided that if I was going to do this, I would have to draw a line under it. I would have to decide when I myself would be done with the story of Warcraft, because as long as I had money to spend, the story of Warcraft would never be done with me. Because I played Kingdom Hearts 2 when I was a child, I've had an obsession with the number 13, and I decided that if I were to write the story, I would end things with WoW's 12th expansion. 13.0, if you will. Remember, this was around the Dragonflight time, so we had run through the majority of the old villains, the backlog of Warcraft lore from far back in the day for the Warcraft RPG. Around 1 year after I made that choice, Chris Metzen returned to the BlizzCon stage and announced the World Sold Saga, hard sealing the trajectory of one of WoW's greatest stories to end in 13.0. That solved it for me. The coincidence was too strong. I decided I wanted to do this, and so I will. But first, we must discuss the rules, for there will be rules. Alright, rule number 1, and this one is big. I can't change any expansions or patches. I want to follow the story of WoW as it was originally laid out, and I want it to hit all of the same beats. If I go about changing the flow of the raids and the expansions, then I don't feel it would still be WoW. It would just be me doing stuff. So the expansions will still follow one another in the exact same order, and the patches within those expansions must all appear in one form or another. And one small note, in certain cases where I suspect we may have lost a patch or two, I will be adding those patches back in. The Abyssal Maw raid or the Siege of Shatrath? Welcome back. Rule number 2. As long as it's Warcraft, it's fair game. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes critical events can happen outside of the game that need to, or perhaps merely ought to, be brought into the progression of this new retelling of the game we're making. Most notably the trial of Garrosh Hellscream, which takes place in Christy Golden's masterpiece, War Crimes, but also the novel Wolfheart, a lesser-known gem in my opinion. In any case, while I want this project to be about the story of WoW, from the drums of war and vanilla all the way to whatever Last Titan will be, I fully intend to bring in content from books, comics, the shorts, and most notably from Hearthstone. Rule number 3, if it doesn't get mentioned, consider it to be unchanged. Let's be real, Warcraft is huge, and there's no way I can cover everything. Novel's made an entire career out of that, and he's still not finished. I can't possibly go line by line through every chunk of quest text. I'll try, but what I really want to focus on is telling the best, most cohesive story possible. And if something gets left out, then just take the original canon's word for it. And that's it. Those are the rules. Now, one last thing before I wrap up. Throughout the writing of this script, I was resignedly aware that, though I had envisioned this project as a fun activity to do with a group of friends, I was more than likely cursed to undertake it alone. After all, there are not many people who want to sit around for hours at a time and learn real-world history, let alone fictional history. I had a few people in mind, but nobody really seemed to jump at the chance. But then, there was one. A child of light and shadow who has walked the land of the dead and returned. He is currently sitting here helping me edit all of this and doing technology things that my brain does not know how to do. Hargan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Hargan, a longtime friend of Weirdo. We actually met with another friend as well. 3 of us all worked at the same place. We found out we all played WoW. That was amazing. That was great. We had a lot of good times. and bad. So I've been playing World of Warcraft since vanilla. Not since release, but since vanilla. I never made it to 60. I was about 55 when the Burning Crusade dropped. I am not a huge lore person, to be honest. I am not. I'm a PvPer, and not a good one. I love Arena, I love Battlegrounds, ganking people, and Arathi, all that fun stuff. Now that being said, I do enjoy the lore of Warcraft. You know, I'm a nerd, obviously. Can't play a game like WoW without enjoying the lore somewhat. And to be totally honest, after Wrath of the Lich King, I have no idea what's going on. Genuinely, no idea. I did play Legion, and that was cool, because I like Illidan. But yeah, Weirdo started talking to me about rewriting this, and I thought that that was fantastic, because, as I mentioned before, after Wrath of the Lich King, I have no idea what's going on in the story anymore. So, yes.
Thank you, Hargan. And though he's too bashful to admit it himself, while he hasn't kept up with the lore since Wrath of the Lich King, he's been a consistent PvP presence all the way up till Battle for Azeroth, and has paired with names he has asked me not to share. Now, to close out this already far too long introduction, let's do a TLDR. Number 1, I love WoW, it's been a huge part of my life, but I'm not satisfied with the recent storytelling and have decided to rewrite it, mostly for fun, as an excuse to drink. Number 2, my friend Hargan has agreed to join me in this journey, and we both intend to make sure that neither of us take it too seriously. Number 3, formatting. The series will proceed in 2 lanes. The first lane, a heavily scripted, heavily edited video formally explaining changes in our new canon, and in a second lane, an unscripted, prolonged podcast where Hargan and I both crack a bottle of whatever we fancy that week and chat about WoW and how we'd fix it. The second lane may have occasional guest stars, who knows. It's not often we find people who want to spend their evenings discussing fictional history, but anyone we find who we feel has a passion for Warcraft will be welcome. And to anyone who's made it this far, why? No, I'm kidding. We hope you managed to make it to the end of this video, and if you did, and any of this sounds like fun to you, we hope you'll join us again. Until then, Hargan, you want to sign us off? Hargan Smash! Hargan Smash indeed. See you all soon.